You know, people always want to hear about the big dramatic investments. Apple, Coca-Cola, the household names. But if I'm being honest, the company that's meant the most to me personally, the one that taught me more lessons over a longer period than any other, is one that a lot of folks might not think about. GEICO, the government employees insurance company. Here's something most people don't know. I didn't just buy GEICO once. I bought it 3 separate times across 5 decades. Each purchase was different. Each one taught me something new. And together, they shaped how I think about business, about competitive advantage, about the insurance industry, and about the power of sticking with quality over the long haul. Let me take you back to where it all started. 1951. I was 20 years old. I'd just finished up at Columbia Business School, studying under Ben Graham. Ben was everything to me at that point. He'd written the book on value investing, literally, security analysis, and the intelligent investor. Those books changed my life. Ben taught me to think of stocks as pieces of ownership in real businesses, not just ticker symbols bouncing around. He taught me about margin of safety, about buying things for less than they're worth. So I'm back home in Omaha, working at my dad's brokerage firm, and I'm reading constantly. Financial statements, annual reports, anything I can get my hands on. One Saturday, I'm going through the insurance section of Moody's manual, and I see Ben Graham's name listed as chairman of this company called GEICO, Government Employees Insurance Company. I'd never heard of it before, but I figured if Ben was running it, it had to be interesting. I didn't call ahead, didn't write a letter. I just got on a train to Washington, D.C. that weekend, showed up at their office on a Saturday morning. The building was locked, naturally. Nobody works on Saturday. But I'm standing there, knocking on the door, because I traveled all this way, and I wasn't about to turn around without learning something. Eventually, a custodian showed up and let me in. He told me there was exactly one executive in the building that day. Fellow named Lorimer Davidson. I found my way to his office and knocked. This man, Lorimer Davidson, he could have sent me away. Here's some 20-year-old showing up unannounced on his Saturday. But he didn't. He invited me in, and for the next 4 hours, he walked me through everything. How insurance works, how GEICO was different, what their margins looked like, what their growth potential was. Every question I asked, he answered. It was like getting a private seminar from someone who really knew the business inside and out. What Lorimer explained to me that day was revolutionary, at least to me. Most insurance companies back then, they sold policies through local agents. You'd walk into an agent's office in your town. They'd write you a policy and they'd earn a commission, usually 15% of what you paid, sometimes more. That commission was baked into your premium. So if your insurance cost you $100, 15 of that was going to the agent. GEICO did something completely different. They cut out the agent. They sold directly to customers, mostly through the mail back then. No middleman, no commission, which meant they could charge you $85 for the same coverage that would cost you $100 somewhere else. Lower price for the customer, but still plenty of profit for the company because their costs were so much lower. But it got even better. GEICO didn't try to insure everybody. They focused on government employees and military personnel, folks with stable jobs, steady incomes, generally good driving records, lower risk customers. So not only were their costs lower because they didn't pay commissions, their claims were lower too because they were insuring better drivers. It was brilliant. Low-cost structure plus better risk selection equals higher profits. I took the train back to Omaha, and I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd learned. I looked at GEICO's stock, trading around $42 a share. I did the math on what I thought the company was worth based on their earnings, their growth trajectory, their competitive position, and I came to the conclusion it was worth substantially more than 42. So I made a decision that probably seemed crazy to everyone around me. I took about $10,000, which was more than half of everything I had in the world, and I bought GEICO stock. My family thought I'd lost my mind. Putting most of your net worth into one company, an insurance company nobody's heard of? But I had conviction. I understood the business model. I understood why it worked. And I trusted that Ben Graham wouldn't be chairman of something that wasn't solid. So I bought it, and I held it. Over the next year or so, that stock went from $42 to over $100, more than doubled. I was 21 years old, and I thought I had it all figured out. Then I made a mistake. I sold. I had other things I wanted to do with the money, other opportunities I thought I saw. And I'd made a good profit, so why not take it? Looking back now, that was one of the biggest errors of my early career. If I just held that stock, never sold it, it would eventually have been worth millions. But I was young. I was still thinking in terms of buying cheap, selling when it hits fair value, moving on to the next thing. I hadn't yet learned the real power of just holding on to wonderful businesses and letting them compound forever. So that was the first time, my introduction to GEICO. And even though I sold too soon, it planted something in my mind. I learned how powerful a simple, sustainable competitive advantage could be. Low costs that competitors couldn't match, better customer selection, direct distribution. Those advantages weren't going away. They were structural. And I filed that away for the future. For the next 20-some years, I watched GEICO from the sidelines. Didn't own shares, but I followed what they were doing. And they kept executing, growing steadily, taking market share, sticking to their model. The business kept working exactly like Lorimer had explained it would. Then, in the mid-70s, things went wrong. GEICO started expanding too aggressively. They moved into new states where they didn't understand the local conditions. They started accepting riskier customers to fuel growth. The underwriting discipline that had made them successful, it slipped. And suddenly, the company was hemorrhaging money. Hundreds of millions in losses. The stock collapsed from around $60 down to $2. People thought GEICO was finished. Bankruptcy looked like a real possibility. But when I looked at the situation, I saw something different than what most people saw. Yes, they'd made mistakes. Yes, they were losing money. But the fundamental business model, that hadn't changed. Selling directly still cost less than selling through agents. Good risks still produced better results than bad risks. The brand still had value. Millions of customers still trusted GEICO. The problem wasn't that the model was broken. The problem was execution. They'd gotten undisciplined, and I believe that with the right management, they could fix it. So in 1976, I started buying again. This was my second time purchasing GEICO. The stock was around $2 or $3. Berkshire put in about $4 million initially, and we kept adding to the position as I gained more confidence. Eventually, we owned roughly a third of the company. Not control, but we were the biggest shareholder by far, and they asked me to join the board of directors, which I did. The company brought in new leadership. A man named Jack Byrne came in as chief executive. Jack knew insurance. He knew what needed to happen. And he did it, even though it was painful. He stopped writing business that couldn't be profitable. He raised prices where they needed to be raised. He pulled out of markets where GEICO couldn't compete. He went back to the original playbook: low cost, good risks, direct sales. No fancy stuff, just the basics done well. It took a couple years, but the turnaround worked. The losses stopped. The underwriting improved. Profitability came back. And once that happened, once they demonstrated they could get back to making money the right way, the growth resumed. People still wanted cheaper car insurance. GEICO could still deliver that better than anyone else. The stock started climbing. $2 became 5, then 10, then 20. Our $4 million stake turned into something much, much larger. Through the 80s and into the 90s, GEICO just kept getting stronger. Jack Byrne eventually moved on, and Tony Nicely took over as chief executive. Tony was superb. He understood the culture. He understood what made GEICO special. He protected it. The company kept growing market share, kept improving operations, kept generating excellent returns. By the mid-90s, Berkshire owned roughly half of GEICO. It was one of our most valuable holdings. And I started asking myself a question: why don't we just own the whole thing? GEICO was exactly the kind of business I wanted Berkshire to own completely. Predictable earnings, excellent management, a competitive advantage that wasn't going anywhere, and most importantly, it generated something incredibly valuable called float. Let me explain float, because this is central to why insurance became so important to Berkshire. When you run an insurance company, customers pay you premiums up front. Let's say you collect $100 from a customer today. At some point in the future, you'll have to pay out claims, maybe $80 in claims, plus another $15 for operating expenses. But there's a gap between when you collect the premium and when you pay the claim. Could be months, could be years, depending on the type of insurance. During that gap, you're holding the money. That's float, and you can invest it. Put it in stocks, bonds, whatever makes sense. If you're good at investing, you can earn substantial returns on that float. And if you're disciplined about your underwriting, if you make sure the premiums you collect are enough to cover the claims and expenses, then that float doesn't cost you anything. You're essentially getting an interest-free loan from your customers. GEICO was generating billions of dollars in float. And because they were usually profitable on their underwriting, that float was essentially free. Berkshire could invest those billions and keep whatever returns we generated. It was an incredible source of capital. And the more GEICO grew, the more float we had. That float, invested wisely over decades, that's been one of the engines powering everything Berkshire has accomplished. So in 1996, I approached GEICO about acquiring the remaining 50% we didn't already own. We negotiated a price of roughly $2.3 billion for that remaining half. Some observers thought we overpaid. The market value was somewhat lower. But I wasn't concerned about what the stock market thought. I cared about what the business would generate over the next 20, 30, 40 years. And I knew GEICO was worth every dollar. That was the third purchase. This time, we bought it all. GEICO became a wholly owned subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway. No more worrying about stock prices. No more quarterly earnings pressure from outside shareholders. We could just focus on building the business for the long term, serving customers well, maintaining underwriting discipline, and growing sensibly. And it's been magnificent. When we bought full control, GEICO had around 2.6 million policies. Today, it's got over 18 million. The float has grown from roughly 2.7 billion to north of 40 billion. The company has been consistently profitable. It's gained market share year after year. It's the second largest auto insurer in the country now. And the value it's created for Berkshire, both through its own earnings and through the float we've invested elsewhere, it's staggering. What makes GEICO's advantage so durable? It's the same thing Lorimer Davidson explained to me in 1951. No agents means lower costs. That structural advantage hasn't gone away. State Farm has tens of thousands of agents. Allstate has thousands. They've built their entire business model around agents. They can't just eliminate them without destroying their distribution system. So they're stuck with a cost structure that's 15% higher than GEICO's, maybe more. GEICO doesn't have that problem. They sell direct, always have. First it was mail and phone. Now it's mostly online. But the principle is the same. Cut out the middleman, pass the savings to customers, keep plenty of margin for yourself. It's simple, and it works. Over the decades, GEICO has also built tremendous brand recognition. The gecko, the cavemen, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. People know these things. When someone shops for car insurance, GEICO is on their short list. They get a quote. Often it's the lowest quote because GEICO's costs are lower. So they buy. It's not complicated, but it's effective, and the company has maintained discipline. They haven't chased growth at any cost. They haven't tried to insure everyone, regardless of risk. They've stuck to what works: careful underwriting, low costs, direct sales. That consistency, that discipline, it compounds over time. It's why GEICO has been able to grow profitably for decades, while many competitors struggle. The management has been crucial to all of this. Tony Nicely ran the company for many years after we acquired full ownership. He was exactly the kind of person you want running a business. He understood GEICO deeply. He cared about the long term, not about making quarterly numbers look good. He was honest, straightforward, focused on doing right by customers. And he didn't need me hovering over him. I could trust him to make good decisions. When Tony retired, the leadership transitioned smoothly. The culture remained intact. The principles remained the same. That kind of continuity is rare and precious. A lot of companies bring in outsiders who want to shake things up, reinvent the business, make their mark. That usually ends badly. The best approach with a successful business is usually to preserve what works, protect the culture, and just keep executing. Insurance has taught me so much over the years. It's a different kind of business than most. You're selling a promise to pay if something bad happens. Your customer hopes they never have to use what they bought. But if you price that promise correctly, if you're careful about who you make the promise to, if you deliver when called upon, it's a wonderful business. And the float, I can't stress this enough, the float is extraordinary. Berkshire now has more than $150 billion in total float from all our insurance operations. GEICO is a huge part of that. $150 billion that we get to invest. That's produced enormous returns over the decades. It's funded acquisitions. It's funded stock purchases. It's let us be patient because we always have capital available when opportunities arise. People often ask what's made Berkshire successful. There are many factors, but insurance float is right at the top of the list. We've grown this float over decades. We've been disciplined about not letting it cost us money, and we've invested it well. It's like running a bank where the depositors pay you for the privilege of leaving their money with you. That's essentially what low-cost insurance float is. Now, let me talk about the broader lessons from my 70-year relationship with GEICO, because there are several that apply to thinking about any business, not just insurance. First lesson: when you find real quality, recognize it. When I was 20 years old, sitting in Lorimer Davidson's office, I was seeing something genuinely special, a business model that made economic sense, a competitive advantage that was real and sustainable, management that understood what they had. I didn't need years of experience to see that. I just needed to pay attention, ask the right questions, and think it through. Quality reveals itself if you're willing to look carefully and think clearly. Second lesson: coming back to quality is often the right move. I sold GEICO the first time, which was a mistake. But I got another opportunity in the 70s when the company hit trouble. A lot of people would have said, well, I sold it once, I'm not going back. Or they would have seen the problems and assumed the company was finished. But I looked past the temporary difficulties and saw that the underlying quality was still there. The business model still worked. They just needed to execute better. Being willing to revisit something you know well, that can lead to extraordinary opportunities. Third lesson: sometimes you need to own the whole thing. We did fine owning pieces of GEICO through the stock market. Made good money, but owning it outright has been even better. When you own the whole business, you can think truly long-term. You're not worried about stock price fluctuations. You're not dealing with outside shareholders who want short-term results. You can make decisions that might hurt near-term numbers, but build long-term value. And you can integrate the business into your broader strategy more effectively. Fourth lesson: float is one of the most valuable things in business. This goes beyond insurance, really. Any business that collects money upfront and pays out later has a form of float. Retailers have it with inventory. Subscription businesses have it. But insurance float, when you can get it cheaply and invest it well, that's special. It's been transformative for Berkshire, and it all started with understanding what GEICO had. Fifth lesson: protect the culture and the model that works. GEICO has been successful for 70 years because each generation of management has understood what makes the company special and has protected it. They haven't gotten fancy. They haven't diversified into things they don't understand. They've stuck to auto insurance, sold directly, kept costs low, underwritten carefully. That consistency, that discipline, that respect for what works, it's powerful. When you find a company doing something well, the temptation is often to expand, to try new things, to grow faster. Sometimes that works, but often it dilutes the focus and weakens the core business. Better to do one thing exceptionally well than to do 10 things adequately. GEICO has understood that. They're the best at what they do, and they keep doing it. Sixth lesson: management quality shows up most clearly over time. You can't always judge management from 1 year or one decision, but over decades, you see who really understands their business, who stays disciplined, who makes good capital allocation decisions, who builds lasting value. GEICO has had excellent management consistently. That's not luck. It's culture. It's hiring well and promoting from within. It's valuing the right things. Let me tell you where things stand today. GEICO insures roughly 1 in 7 cars in America. It's still growing, still taking share from higher-cost competitors. The competitive advantage is as strong as ever, maybe stronger because of scale and technology and brand recognition built over decades. Someone could theoretically start a new direct auto insurer tomorrow, but they'd be decades behind GEICO in brand awareness, in data, in scale, in customer relationships. The moat is wide and deep, and the float keeps growing. As GEICO writes more policies, collects more premiums, the float increases. Berkshire invests that float. The returns compound. It's a virtuous cycle that's been running for decades and shows no signs of stopping. That's what you want. A business that gets stronger over time, where the advantages compound, where the moat widens. If I think about the total value GEICO has created for Berkshire, it's almost incalculable. The direct earnings have been substantial, but the real magic is the float. Those billions and billions of dollars we've invested over the decades, that's funded so much of what Berkshire has become. Acquisitions, stock purchases, everything. GEICO hasn't just been a good investment, it's been foundational. And it traces back to being curious, to knocking on that door on a Saturday morning, to asking questions, to listening carefully to someone who really knew their business, to recognizing quality when you see it, to having the conviction to act on what you've learned. Those things, they compound over a lifetime. Lorimer Davidson spent 4 hours with me that Saturday in 1951. He didn't have to. I was nobody, just a kid who showed up unannounced. But he was generous with his time and his knowledge, and that generosity changed my life. Years later, after I'd bought GEICO the second time and joined the board, Lorimer and I became close friends. He was like a second father to me. We stayed in touch for decades until he passed away. And I'll always be grateful for what he taught me that first day and in the years that followed. The GEICO story isn't just about making money, though we've certainly done that. It's about relationships, about learning, about recognizing quality, about patience, about sticking with what works, about the power of sustainable competitive advantage, about the value of good management and strong culture, about understanding a business deeply and having the conviction to act on that understanding. 3 purchases over 5 decades, from a 20-year-old with $10,000 to a company generating tens of billions in value for Berkshire. That's what's possible when you find something truly special, when you understand it, when you're patient, and when you don't let it go. I still think about that Saturday morning sometimes, standing outside that building, knocking on the door, not knowing if anyone would let me in, not knowing that the conversation I was about to have would shape the next 70 years of my life. Sometimes the smallest decisions, the simplest actions, they lead to the most profound outcomes. You just have to be curious enough to knock on the door. GEICO has been part of my life for longer than almost anything else except my family. It's taught me lessons I've applied to hundreds of other investments. It's generated value beyond what I could have imagined back in 1951. And it's still going strong, still executing, still growing, still creating value year after year. That's the power of a wonderful business. That's the power of sustainable competitive advantage. That's the power of patience and long-term thinking. That's the GEICO story. 3 purchases, 1 lifetime, more lessons than I can count, and a reminder that sometimes the best investments are the ones you come back to again and again, because quality endures. Thanks for listening. And if you need car insurance, well, you know where to go. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. After 70 years, that's still true. Some things never change.